In this webinar today, we're going to explore the benefits of discussion in our online classrooms, as well as some of the best practices that instructors can use to effectively facilitate class discussions. First, I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the reasons for having discussion boards in online classes? And you can go ahead and type your responses in the questions area of your screen. So so far we've got to increase student interaction, and that's a good use of the boards indeed. A NEASC requirement. Absolutely, we're not correspondence courses. We have to facilitate engagement with the students and the material. Absolutely. I love the word facilitate. We're going to use that later. Okay. Well, discussion boards are a relatively simple but extremely powerful online learning tool. And these are some of the things I came up with. If we have a well-crafted and effectively facilitated discussion forum, we're going to have opportunities for our students to build community, to ask questions, to debate, to achieve consensus. They're going to engage more deeply with concepts. It gives them opportunities to think critically, to extend learning, to construct meaning, and to reflect on new ideas. So all of those are really good reasons to use discussion boards. In a lot of ways, online discussion boards are similar to face-to-face discussions, but the asynchronous nature of online forums has a unique potential for student-centered learning. And there are key differences. First, the research shows us that discussion boards foster increased participation. When compared to face-to-face classes, the asynchronous online space allows participants to have more time to read and to ponder discussion prompts and postings before crafting a response. So students who might hesitate to raise their hand in a face-to-face class have the opportunity and often the requirement to engage in online classroom discussions. So that's a very nice benefit of discussion boards. In the online space, we also know that there is often richer and more informed discussion. Because discussions in the online environment ask students, questions that they have more time to consider. They can think about how they're going to integrate course readings, research, and other personal experiences into their responses. So that's a definite benefit. Online discussions also challenge students to view divergent perspectives as they discuss and debate ideas with their classmates. And one of the challenges to instructors is to allow the tension of a good debate to build and then unfold, but also to follow along and know when to step in if things become either unpleasant or if the discussion strays too far from its original intent. So there's this challenge of balance. The online instructor wants to, on the one hand, provide a supportive presence while also allowing students to have increased control over their own learning experience. So we're going to have a little poll, and Chris is going to put that up. We want to think about how much we want to participate as instructors, and how often do we need to be on our discussions. So the question asks, what is an ideal level of participation in a discussion board as an instructor? And you can choose one of the following. We'll do a quick poll. All of these are actually kind of interesting. We've got most of you saying that we're responding only when students are veering from the topic. A few of you saying responding to every student at least once. So you can see the results there. And we're going to talk about what some of the best practices are really for participation. And maybe this was a little unfair because we asked you to choose only one. But let's move on to best practice number 1. Okay, our first best practice is to actually be present. You may or may not be surprised to learn what the research shows, that your students do actually want you to be there. In fact, the research shows that instructor presence is a key element of student satisfaction in online courses, and this is at all levels. You want to make sure that you acknowledge each of your students at some point, and the best place to do that is usually the icebreaker. most courses have an icebreaker or some sort of introduction discussion board. So let your students know that you're interested in them and their success by acknowledging each of them during the first week of class. And as the courses unroll, while you shouldn't respond to every discussion strand, we'll talk about that in a minute, occasional posts within each weekly forum leave digital footprints. And these are occasional comments or questions that let your students know that you are present and following the conversation. So occasional meaningful feedback within the discussion boards really personalize the learning space and can make instructors appear to be more approachable. So these are all really good reasons to be present. And best practice number 2, we want to step away from the podium. You have a lot of great wisdom to add to the discussion. This is why you're an instructor, but you need to resist the temptation to lecture. We want to the best degree possible, become a facilitator rather than the sage on the stage. And as you can see by the definition there, a facilitator is providing indirect or inobtrusive assistance, guidance, or supervision. And this can be challenging. I'm noticing that Marta posted that she makes her responses in the grading box, and all of her feedback is located there. I'm going to put that off till a little bit later. We can talk about that because we are going to talk about feedback a little bit, and that is something that instructors often bring up, like where and when should I provide feedback? Should I do it all at the end or during the course of the week? So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Thanks, Marta. Okay, so what does it mean to be a facilitator? A facilitator encourages a student-centered approach to discussions rather than providing all of the answers. So these are some of the things that you can do to act as a facilitator rather than being a lecturer. You need to be there to redirect conversation when it's too far off topic or when the information is incorrect or the tone becomes hostile. And that happens sometimes, and being available to your students and actually following along in the course of conversation can help you to sort of redirect when that happens. As a facilitator, you should be asking open-ended questions to promote critical thinking or to change directions when a topic has fallen flat. There's nothing worse than being a really excited student in a classroom and finding that nobody else is really as excited as you are and the conversation isn't going anywhere, but that's a place where the facilitator, the instructor, can really move things along. A facilitator would encourage students to respond to posts that have gone longer than a day or two without a response. An instructor can promote reflective practice, getting students to engage metacognitively and to consider why they believe what they believe. That's really important. And the instructor will also connect disparate threads when things are going in a variety of directions, maybe pulling some of those ideas together and bringing it back to the context of the course. And then finally, providing current research or other information that students may not have considered. And again, this is where your wisdom and your experience come into play. Frequently, instructors are uncertain about how often to post and when to post, and it is a best practice to post early in the week. In the early post, or it can actually be a course announcement early in the week, you can provide some context to the discussion prompt and showing where it fits into the course while also encouraging early participation. Go ahead and get in there, go ahead and post. View your early post as an opportunity to informally assess. So your students know that you're there. They may be more apt to ask a question of you, but also you can ask questions and provide formative feedback to students to improve the quality of their posts. If you're finding that they're giving answers that aren't very substantive or maybe not backing up what they have to say. You can draw attention to particularly well-crafted posts that can act as a student model. And you may also think about emailing students with suggestions. And this can, in fact, improve their grade in the long run and their performance. Because if you're letting them know where they're falling flat, that gives them an opportunity and some encouragement to make changes before the end of the week. Best practice number 4 is to know your course. And the greatest reason for this is that you can take that discussion board and make sure that it has relevance to the students. You want to ask yourself whether the discussion prompt is intended to help students to prepare for a future assignment, whether it's to help them meet a particular course objective. And if that's the case, you want to continually assess during the discussion whether the discussion boards are actually meeting that particular goal. As I said before, you want to contextualize, encourage students to reflect on what they've discussed and to consider how the conversation fits into the course, their own philosophy, and their professional practice. It's also a great idea to take time near the end of a discussion to wrap up the discourse. Consider using an emailed announcement for this purpose. So students who have completed their posts and maybe aren't checking the discussion boards as often will still see your wrap-up. They won't miss it. You might want to use that opportunity to provide additional resources that students may want to explore. And you can also use it as a segue into the next topic so that the course has sort of a continual flow. The last thing we want is for students to be asking the question, as we've got at the bottom, is like, what are we doing? I don't know, what does this have to do with anything? All right. Now, it might make you happy to know, though, we don't expect you to hog the board. This goes along with not trying to lecture. You want to avoid providing immediate responses to student posts because ideally you're giving students time to respond to one another first. The more they construct their own meaning, the better. If you respond too early or conversely wait too long to respond, then that may shut down the conversation. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there. If students aren't posting, resist the temptation to provide the answer. It's often better to provide a thoughtful question. You can provide maybe just a small amount of information and then ask students to comment. Sometimes it can be helpful to respond with a controversial quote or an article, something that you know a little bit about, and say, hey, what do you think here? And that can push things along. Now, as an instructor, time is precious. I know that. Many of you teach courses in a variety of locations, and you want to budget your time. So schedule a few hours each week to dedicate to your discussion boards and adhere to your schedule. Give yourself permission to walk away. Because while active participation is really, really important, you can't spend all of your time in the discussion boards. You have grading to do, you have families, and hopefully other things going on. So that brings us to best practice number 6. You do want to be a predictable presence. There's really nothing worse as an online student than asking a question and then hearing crickets. Nobody's there, nobody's responding. Where is my instructor? So you want to check in regularly. You may even want to let your students know in advance what days or how often you will be checking in, if that's practical to do so. As you're posting, another way to be predictable is to model academic tone and the level of writing that you expect your students to use in their own posts. If you are overly casual and that's not what you expect them to provide for you in their assignments or in their discussion posts, then that can be a little bit confusing. Make sure that you're providing support for your own major points, and that will model good academic writing practices while also showing that you're current with your own research and your own practice. Show students that you're invested in their learning and respectful of their work by referring directly to their posts. Don't be afraid to use their name or, hey, I really liked what you did because. And of course, use a positive and encouraging tone that shows enthusiasm for your subject while also promoting intellectual curiosity. I have a comment here. It says, despite my examples and those of other students, I have a student that has ignored instructions for how to post initial discussion board prompt questions and how to post responses to other students. The posts are full of spelling errors and poor grammar, more like text message responses. And the person, it looks like Marta, is asking for ideas and language to help the student improve those postings. That, I think, is going to be a continual challenge as kind of our digital natives are increasingly in our graduate programs. It's usually a best practice to email corrections rather than going straight for, on the discussion board itself, although it can be helpful sometimes to post an announcement and be general about it. I've noticed that some of you are posting informally. Here's some examples, because they really might not know. If they've been very active on discussion boards and Facebook, they may not really see the difference in audiences. Another thing that you might do is find resources for the student and point them in the direction of our writing center. If you think that the problem is that they are not able to write at a certain level that you'd like to bring them to. So that's a really, really good question, and I think that's something that online instructors and actually face-to-face instructors are increasingly dealing with. I hope that answered that question. I have another question here from Jacoba. It seems that if I respond to students frequently, it shuts down student-to-student communication. Like if I reply to a thread, it seems like the other students stop replying because they think that I have the right or best answer. I only post when it is to redirect students who are off topic or don't have a concept right, to answer questions that are directed towards me, or to summarize the whole class discussion at the end of the week. I'm also teaching graduate students who should be more communicative than to rely on me to help them talk with each other, right? Yes, and actually the research shows that although the students do want you there, as the academic level increases, that the communication should be different. Redirecting is great. Wrapping things up at the end is great. Just letting them know that you're there. And that's what I meant by digital footprints, kind of letting them see your presence. And always trying not to answer the question, but rather to redirect. Like, I'd love to see what some of the other students have to say about that really good point that you made, that sort of thing. Okay, I hope that helps. All right, best practice number 7, and this is kind of a funny thing. If you remember when you're like in kindergarten and you go to the grocery store and you see your teacher and you're just totally floored because how can the teacher be at the grocery store? You don't want to be a bot. You don't live in your computer, and you don't want your students to imagine that that's the only place you exist. So a lot of times with our standardized courses, instructors wonder, what their role is, and along with the course announcements, the discussion board is a really excellent opportunity for you to personalize your course and to allow students to see who you are. And again, if they see you as a human being, as somebody who's accessible, then they are going to be much more likely to ask for help, to accept your feedback, even when it's not positive, and to know that you're in it with them and for them. It looks like we have another question from Julia. When students post to the discussion board at the end of the week, even though this is a weekly reminder, or there is a weekly reminder to post early, how do you enhance the idea that posting early enhances the discussions? Oh, this is an ongoing challenge. Sometimes you've got a course where the students have great chemistry and they're really eager beavers and they're on there early and the flow of the conversation is just moving along. And then there are always those who sort of wait to the last minute. And there's a lot of reasons that students may be doing that. Maybe they have other jobs. Maybe they're not fully committed to the course the way they should be. I really think the best thing that you can do is to continually remind them. If there's a requirement on the rubric, and that might vary from program to program, you can point in that direction and let them know that they're missing points for posting late. But reminding them that, part of the reason for online discussion is give and take, and if they're not there showing up, then that's not going to happen. Kind of going back to one of the other best practices, though, you can also sometimes provide a question or something. You can email them individually and say, hey, I noticed you haven't popped in yet. I'd love to see you on the board. How's everything going? That sort of thing. That can help as well. So, good question. And our best practice number 8 is to provide excellent feedback. And this will also go back to what Marta was asking about before. Feedback happens in a lot of different locations. A lot of times we think of feedback as the grade at the end, but really what we're trying to do, even at the graduate level, is to get students to become better communicators, better practitioners of what they're learning. And so we want to provide little bits of feedback throughout the course. Now, some students are there, they're raring to go, they're doing everything they need to do, and maybe just once or twice in a term, it might be great to either, provide a post to that student or even email and just say, great, you're right on target, I love what I'm seeing. But other times students are maybe, even if they're mostly doing what they're supposed to do, maybe they're failing in one way or the other on some other element. And if you provide sort of formative feedback early in the week, giving them some opportunity to improve, you can really help your students, and they will really benefit from that. So you want to be prompt, and that has to do with the end of the week grading, where you're using your embedded rubric, I hope. And if you have questions, by the way, about embedded rubrics, please ask your instructional designers. We love to walk instructors through courses and all of our cool tools. But you also want to be prompt within the discussion board. If somebody is sort of maybe lacking support, they say, well, this is what I believe, and there's no support there. Go ahead and say, okay, well, John, how about that seems like a really great response. Is there anything from our readings this week that might, support that answer? Or have you read anything in your research that would help us to understand this better? Go ahead and ask the question and see what they come up with. Sometimes another student will be the one to respond, and so maybe that student isn't at the end of the week getting the grade, but maybe by the next week they'll realize if they do that, that they'll actually have an increased grade, because a lot of students are obviously grade motivated. So you want to also provide specific summative feedback, and this means going beyond just clicking the points values in the rubric. If students are doing a really great job, or if they're missing the mark in certain areas, give them it doesn't have to be really long in order to be effective. Provide them just a little blurb about, what you're seeing in their work. Students will really appreciate that. I think it goes without saying that you want to always start with the positive, and provide resources for improvement. If you have that student, for instance, who's really struggling with spelling, organization, sentences, or maybe just finding resources to support their ideas, then provide them with some way of doing better rather than just saying, hey, this is wrong. And the goal is to get from point A to point B. We'd love it to be a straight line, but truly it rarely is a straight line. So, all right, so you've got all those best practices. You are ready to go forth and conquer and be a superhero facilitator. Does anybody have any more questions or experiences, things that you want to share?
So we've got a
few more comments. Heather, thank you. I'm glad that was helpful for you. And let's see. Do you have any quick, do you have a quick sheet of phrases to help, especially with the student I mentioned? Marta, let me think on that a little bit more, and I bet we can come up with something to help you from the IDS end of things, because the challenges that you are mentioning are very common ones, and maybe if we can come up with something, we can put it out to everybody at the same time. That is really very common to have a student that's struggling like that. You are very welcome, Al Cunningham. And let's see, what do you do with a student who tries to be the instructor responding to every post? This is from Susan. That might be something to do in the back door. Encourage the enthusiasm, say you think it's great that they're doing that. But let them know. Don't feel like in order to get a good grade at the end of the week that you have to respond to everything. We've got some reluctant students who may be waiting to post, and maybe just encourage them to take a step back. But of course, be very positive, because that is a student who is an eager beaver because they want to do well in the course, and maybe they're really interested. You can also say something like, Susie, that was a great post. I really enjoyed, what you had to say there. Does anybody else have any suggestions, or I'd love to hear what everybody else is thinking on this topic. That can be helpful sometimes. Julia, great. I'm glad that that was helpful. And Penny and Marta, awesome. Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to present too. We love to work with faculty.
Yes, thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for presenting, Susan. You did a great job. Oh, I see a follow-up right here. Heather asks, how about a student who does not respond to any questions, especially when they have superficial posts? Yeah, that's, well, I'm pretty harsh. Fail them. No, you can, I mean, there's I think one of the things that might happen is students are sort of the mindset that they think they're done when they do make that initial post, and responding to them in the discussion board to reach out to them and prod them to return to the subject or to expand upon what they've said before. You might try contacting them through other means like email, because they think, oh, I posted it, I'm done, and they never look in there again. And they might not even know about, how that notification in the upper right-hand corner actually refers to, people have responded to your post, people are, that discussion board is active. So you might try reaching out to them outside of Blackboard via email, because they just don't know to return to the discussion board. And that'll help in a lot of instances. And then Julia suggests reaching out to their advisors to see if they can make some contact with a student who's not posting or responding. That's also a very good route to go. Thank you very much, everyone. I think that this was a very great presentation from Susan. So thank you, Susan. We will be having webinars in the future on a great many subjects, but we will be actually expanding upon this subject discussion more too, because it's so rich and complicated, and we're going to be using your questions and feedback to kind of guide where we take this subject in the future. So look for that, and thanks for attending, and we'll be sending out that supplemental resource packet either today or tomorrow, so watch for that. Thank you very much for attending, and goodbye.